But is it such a mystery after all? If you factor in reincarnation into the picture and combine that with the knowledge of consciousness from ancient sages, you can begin to piece together an entirely new composite image of how traits and tendencies, in the form of instincts, are propagated through a species. Significant evidence exists proving the existence of reincarnation, and Dr. Ian Stevenson of Virginia University spent 40 years of his life collecting empirical data on reincarnation and has published his findings extensively.
I was simply watching television one day and I saw the BB special on reincarnation, and it was very accidental, and Ian Stevenson was standing there talking quietly about case studies he had conducted over a 15 or 20-year period, and they showed on the television the book, 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. I thought that might be very interesting, so I went out and bought the book and I started reading the book. And one of the things you'll find that when you read the case studies, rather than talk about what they are without reading them closely, there's a kind of force to the case studies that is really enticing, enthralling. And what I did is I read them all the way through, and I put down the book and I said, well, now this must be wrong. And and I started reading. So I began reading it, and the more I read, the more I realized that this was important, and it was good research, empirical research, and that it rendered it a scientific question, and that I couldn't think of any alternative explanation as plausible for the data as that some people reincarnate. As a matter of fact, some people have said, after reading the data in the past 10 years, some people have said, look, maybe it's not unreasonable to believe that some people reincarnate. And Stevenson says that. It's certainly not unreasonable to believe, because this is the best fit on the data. My reaction is stronger. My claim was that, in the book, that it's irrational to disbelieve it. And a lot of people thought that went over the top. That was too strong a claim. I meant it in a very simple way, that if you have a very commanding argument that you can't refute, not to accept the argument is to act irrationally. That's what I'm saying, that there's a very strong argument here that has not been refuted and cannot be refuted by my lights. Not cannot, but has not been refuted. And it's irrational not to accept it, and the conclusion of that is some people reincarnate. Meaning, by implication, that human beings are more than their bodies, that human personality in the end is not reducible to a statement about biochemical states, brain states, biological properties produced by brain states, or anything like that.
Whatever. There you go. I wish you could see what James was doing right now.
11-year-old James Leininger looks and acts like most boys his age, but beneath his playful spirit is a very deep soul.
And I said, you know, I'm really glad you're my son, and I'm just really fun to have you as my son. And he says, well, he said, I know, that's why I picked you.
When we first met Bruce, Andrea, and James in 2005, his passion for World War II fighter planes was obvious.
I can beat the Japanese easy as pie.
The fascination began when he was a toddler.
Good pilot, put him on.
James seemed intimately familiar with the aircrafts.
He started doing these little drawings of airplanes shooting at other airplanes or being shot down. Bombing ships, you see men parachuting. Here's another one where planes are dropping bombs. This is a carrier.
The violent drawings were followed by extreme night terrors.
He would just be crying. He'd say, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. He laid on his back and kicked up at the ceiling, and he goes, Mama, the little man's going like this. And he laid on his back and kicked his feet up. The little man's going, ooh, 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 can't get out. And I said, well, who's the little man, baby? And he goes, me. I thought Bruce and I were just going to faint.
They questioned, what kind of plane?
Corsair.
Why did your airplane crash?
My plane was shot down.
Who shot your plane?
He looked at me like I was a village idiot. He said,
the Japanese.
Where did he take off from a boat?
Do you remember the name of your boat? He said Natoma.
And his name?
He always said James, but his name is James.
Stunned by his son's words, Bruce tracked down veterans of the USS Natoma Bay.
I wanted to disprove it.
Columbus, Ohio native Leo Pyatt served on the ship.
He asked a few questions about, did I know some of the people? Oh yeah, I remember those people. Yes, there was a Jim Houston, a rather large shell. Just hit him in the engine, and it burst into flames. and went down.
It was all real. James Houston, born and raised in the Midwest, was shot down over Chichijima, Japan.
He got very quiet.
The Leiningers were speechless again when James met Natoma Bay veterans and recognized them by name.
You're Bob Greenwald. I'm serious.
And he'd never met Bob Greenwald?
No, he'd never met him before.
They tracked down James Houston's sister, Ann.
And he goes, it's not Ann, it's Annie. She wasn't my oldest sister. I had an older sister than that. And I said, you did? Who was that? And he goes, Ruth. I mean Ruth.
Annie is what they called me when I was little. Knowing my name and my sister's name, things that my brother did when he was a kid. It's too amazing to describe.
James recalled his favorite childhood possessions, and when we spoke to them via Skype, they shared one specific story involving James Houston's mother.
Annie had sent James the picture that her mother had painted of James Houston. And when James got it, he called Annie to thank her, and he said, where's the one Mom painted of you? And so she went and found it and sent a copy, and later on she told us that no one in the world except her brother and sister knew that there was an identical picture of Annie when she was the same age.
Amazing stories like that caught the attention of Japanese filmmakers. Not long after our story aired, they flew James and his entire family to Chichijima, Japan, and the site of James Houston's plane crash.
Took a tour of the island, got up on a ridge overlooking the harbor. James said, this is where the planes flew in the day my plane was shot down.
Without any help, James knew exactly where the plane crashed. They held a memorial service and dropped flowers over the wreckage.
And James just got so emotional and just lost it. And it was just the most heart-wrenching thing.
But when it was over,
it was cathartic.
You know, it still gives me goosebumps to think that we actually got there and we were there and we were able to close the loop, especially for James, that it was something really important to him.
And when they returned, the death and destruction pictures were replaced with this.
There's dolphins and there's the Japanese ship has its flags flying.
At James's urging, they put all of this and many more incredible stories on paper and published this new book, Soul Survivor.
I hope that it helps people understand the meaning of how precious life is, how fast it can just blow away.
The Leiningers say they aren't promoting reincarnation. Before James, they didn't believe in it.
And I really believe that there's a purpose to this story and that the God that created us wants this story told.
And I also hope that it opens people's eyes up to reincarnation.
You do?
Yeah, I hope it opens people's eyes up to the fact that reincarnation can happen. It is a possibility. It's not a lie.
Well, what follows is that human personality, as we know it, cannot be adequately understood in terms of classical standard psychology, which works on a purely materialistic basis. In other words, to explain human behavior, why people do what they do, on a purely materialistic model, which we typically do, will leave important things out. Because if human beings are more than their bodies, and their minds are causally relevant in producing their behaviors, and the minds are not simply brains, then to explain the behavior you have to appeal to causes that are quite unlike anything people in standard psychology talk about. So one of the implications of this would be that there's something wrong with psychology as we know it on a purely physicalistic model, that it will not be able to succeed in explaining these kinds of cases, and probably not a number of others. So, I mean, but there will be other objections too. I've heard people say reincarnation couldn't occur because we don't know how it could occur. We don't know how. As scientists, we don't know what the mechanism is. We don't know how it couldn't have a mechanism that we could examine, so we can't know that it occurs. As objections go, that certainly leaves a good deal to be desired, because you may not know how something occurs, but have plenty of evidence that it occurs. I don't know how Slewfoot won the 5th race at Hialeah, but I can know that he did very easily. I don't know how you got into this room, but I know that you're here, that sort of story. So you don't have to know why things end up the way they are. Although in mature science, all our explanations will be causal. But there are kinds of explanations of events that are not causal, but they're purely statistical. You know that something's occurring, but you don't know why.
What the research suggests is something that the rishis, swamis, and yogis of India have known for tens of thousands of years, which is that consciousness is a continuum. There is a quality of persistence in consciousness that goes beyond birth and death, and that carries with it knowledge from one generation to the next.